Hey, checking in with chapters 21 to 25 of The Bttrfly Lampshade by Amy Bender, where Francie, a child of a mother who has a psychotic break, ends up going to live with her aunt, uncle, and her newly born cousin. Um, and she grows up there. We're like, I think it's like 20 years 20, something like that later. Maybe a little bit more, less than that, because Vicky, the cousin, is now applying to colleges. And she seems to be really hooked back at this event, this, the rupture with her mother, where her mother had been mentally ill, I think like a good hunk of, if not all of the time she'd spent with her. But, and she'd kind of learned to cope with it. But this was the rupture where she no longer lived with her mother. Her mother went into what seems to be kind of more like assisted living arrangement. Can't seem to live on her own. And she's had these experiences where a butterfly lampshade, and she wakes up and there's a dead butterfly in the water. And a couple of days later, I guess, a beetle that she sees a beetle in the illustration in a kind of a textbook or something, and then she finds the beetle, and then now 10 or whatever years later, it's dried roses seem to have fallen out of a embroidered roses on a on curtains. And she's concerned that maybe, like, am I going crazy? Basically, am I going the way of my mother? She actually she convinces to be taken to a neurologist who says, like, well, your brain scan's fine. And they have this kind of conversation. And he's like, well, what do you think it is? And it's like, well, and she says, it's like, and it's sad sort of that, like, they've taken this jump from, being just kind of representations into beinghood and have just died or arrived dead. And he says, oh yeah, that seems like a pretty sad thing for a miracle. Which it's one of those doctors who's like, I mean, I guess they're trying to be detached, but using a word like miracle is an interesting word to use, to have a writer, to have a doctor use. I mean, not that it would be out of the realm possibility a doctor wouldn't use those kind of that words, but interesting. Maybe a neurologist would versus more of a psychologist who tried to keep things even more neutral. So she's kind of going around these events around. We get more of her, with her mother, and her mother being kind of worried about her, saying, like, she doesn't, like, sleep with a stuffed toy. She doesn't want a nightlight. She forgot her favorite blanket at a friend's or something, and she doesn't seem to care about it. It's like, and Francie hears that edge in her voice, which she sort of knows is like, oh, that's trouble is coming, because they've had times in the past where, working on medications or the medications stop working, that she's kind of gone back over again. And indeed, there's a scene here where she's kind of toying with a skewer in her hair, and as she's talking to her sister on the phone, and Francine's like listening and watching, and she kind of intervenes at that point and says, could you have your hair down? I like it with your hair down. And could you brush me with your hair? And, does these things to take care of her mother, to prevent her mother from maybe doing something. And I mean, she talks about, like, on a whim at one point, she'd taken the screwdriver out and buried it in the back of of her preschool. So she's doing all these things. It's a very, it's a small story. And now, like, in the present, she's made this tent for herself on her balcony, and her aunt is worried about her. Like, why does she insisted on getting the balcony, and now she's doing this tent thing. What's going on with that? And Vicky says, "Oh, this is like your cocoon." It's like, we're back to Bttrfly again. Though Francie calls it her cave, and it's something to contain. Like, she's afraid that everything she's thinking is going to spill out of her and fill the city, and spill out of her, and empty out of her. Yeah, yeah, and making the thing of like her mother was loved things where stuff came to life, which is, and she says like, well, that's magic and wonderful in a story, but if something like that happened in real life, it would be terrifying. It would be unnaturally eerie, terrifying. And she's definitely seems to be kind of wavering on that brink of things coming to life, but not coming to life, arriving dead, butterfly, dead beetle, dried, dried dead roses, all these things. So it's troubling her. She's trying to work it out with, what this thing that's happened to her with her mother. And that the neurologist saying like, well, the first ones happened when you had this break with your mother, and what was happening around this thing with the roses. And that was her mother planning to move out to her own like little apartment. Didn't go well. And then her having a visit, and her bringing up this whole thing with the beetles, the rose, the butterfly, and the beetle, and her mother just kind of completely having almost like a fit, going over backwards in her chair, and them, having, treatment. So it's like she can't even share that with her mother. It's like it's too terrifying to her mother that she is finally going to go wrong. That something is going to go wrong with her, which is maybe the greatest fear of someone with mental illness is like, oh God, I passed it on to my children. There's that. And yeah. So it's a very small story. It's a very small story, which I think is valid. I really hope it isn't going to drop into tweeness. That would be my only thing. Sometimes things can be so small that they become goofy or silly, and I really don't want this to be. So it's going along. I just did a little bit today, but it's going along okay. That whole thing, a miracle. I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. And the cocoon, yeah, it's like, well, yeah, okay, Is she gonna transform into a butterfly? I don't know. I don't think so. Yeah. Though she did have that thing of like, oh, I'm not interested in this guy. At least my present self is. Maybe a future self would be. So that indicates some possibility for change there, which could be butterfly-like, I guess, if it insists on being in this novel. All right, that's the Bttrfly Lampshade by Amy Bender for tonight. More videos later.